You reach out, you wait. Nothing. Not a fight, not a scene, not even a cold, formal message explaining why. Just absence. And the absence is so total, so clean, that it doesn't feel like someone leaving. It feels like someone who was never going to stay. And here's what makes it disorienting. This person wasn't cold. They weren't detached. At some point, they were one of the most present people in your life. They listened. They remembered. They showed up in ways most people don't bother with. And then one day the door closed, quietly, completely. And no amount of knocking has opened it since. From the outside, this looks like cruelty, or pride, or some kind of emotional damage that never got treated. But here's the thing. If you are this person, if you've done this, if you've walked away from someone and genuinely never looked back, you already know it isn't any of those things. It doesn't even feel like a decision. It feels more like the natural end of a process that started long before the silence did. Like a door that had been slowly, steadily closing for months. And one day, you simply stopped holding it open. Stay with me. Because what's actually happening in people like this has a name. Several, in fact. And the oldest one isn't from a psychology textbook. It's from philosophy. It's roughly 2,000 years old. And it describes these people more precisely than most modern frameworks ever will. If you've ever felt understood by psychology more than by people, subscribe. This channel is built for exactly that. The ancient Stoics, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca built their entire philosophy around a single idea so simple, it sounds almost obvious until you try to actually live it. They called it the dichotomy of control, and it goes like this. There are things within your power, and there are things outside of it. Your thoughts, your responses, your choices, those are yours. Everything else, other people's behavior, their feelings about you, whether they change, whether they see you clearly, whether they keep their word, that is not yours. And the Stoics were ruthless about this line. They didn't blur it. They didn't negotiate with it. They drew it, and they lived on the correct side of it. Now, here's what nobody talks about. Some people arrive at this exact conclusion not through philosophy, not through reading Meditations at 22 and having a revelation. They arrive at it through repetition, through years of watching the same patterns replay with the same people, through investing in relationships that return nothing, through saying, "this hurts," and watching it get ignored, through trying and trying again, and eventually understanding, at a level deeper than thought, almost cellular, that you cannot control another person. You never could. And every time you tried, you paid for it. These people didn't study Stoicism. They became it, the hard way. Here's where it gets interesting. Epictetus, who was born a slave, which matters, said something that cuts to the bone. He said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." What he meant was this. The suffering doesn't come from what happens. It comes from the gap between what happens and what you insisted should happen instead. Close that gap. Stop demanding that reality be different. And the suffering dissolves. People who cut others off have usually at some point stopped demanding. They spent time in that gap. They stood in the space between who someone was and who they needed them to be, hoping the distance would close. And when it didn't, when the evidence finally outweighed the hope, something shifted. Not dramatically, quietly. The way a tide goes out. They stopped needing the other person to be different. They accepted what was actually there. And acceptance, real acceptance, the Stoic kind, doesn't look like peace and forgiveness and reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like departure. Because here's the thing, the self-help version of acceptance never tells you. Accepting that someone is who they are does not obligate you to remain in proximity to it. That's not acceptance. That's martyrdom. And the Stoics had no patience for martyrdom. Now, I want to talk about something the Stoics called preferred indifference. And this sounds cold when you first hear it, but stay with me because it explains so much. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this constantly. The idea is that certain things, relationships, reputation, affection, even love, are worth pursuing when they're available. But they are not necessary for a good life. They are preferred. They are not required. The Stoic doesn't need them to function, doesn't collapse without them, doesn't compromise their core values to keep them. Most people are never taught this. They grow up learning that relationships are the point, that connection is the goal, that being loved, being chosen, being kept, these things define your worth, and so they bend, they tolerate, they stay in dynamics that cost them more than they return because the alternative, being without, feels like failure. People who cut others off have usually, somewhere along the way, internalized the inverse of this, not because they read it in a book, because they were forced to. Because at some point, the relationship they were holding on to so tightly revealed itself to be something that was shrinking them. And they had to choose between the relationship and themselves. And they chose themselves, not arrogantly, quietly. The way you make a decision, is right even though it hurts. This is what looks like coldness from the outside. It's not coldness. It's a kind of philosophical self-respect that most people never develop because they're never pushed hard enough to need it. Here's the uncomfortable part, and I want to be honest here because this matters. There is a version of this that is genuinely healthy, and there is a version that isn't. The healthy version is what we've been describing, a person who processed a situation fully, accepted reality clearly, and made a considered decision to remove themselves from something that wasn't working. The unhealthy version uses Stoic language and Stoic behavior as armor against vulnerability. It's not acceptance, it's avoidance. It's not clarity. It's the refusal to risk being hurt again, dressed up as wisdom. The Stoics themselves were clear on this distinction. They did not advocate for emotional shutdown. Marcus Aurelius loved people, wrote about love constantly, grieved losses. He simply refused to be enslaved by those feelings, refused to let the fear of loss dictate his choices. There's a meaningful difference between mastering your emotions and hiding from them. And if you're someone who cuts people off, it's worth asking, with real honesty, which one am I actually doing? Because one is Stoicism. The other is a wound-wearing Stoicism's coat. What the research adds to this, and there's fascinating work here, is that people who operate with this kind of emotional self-containment often show patterns consistent with what psychologists call dismissive avoidant attachment. Brain imaging studies are striking on this. When these individuals face emotional threat, their brains are actually working harder than average, actively suppressing the distress response. The stillness you see on the outside is costing something on the inside. They're not feeling less, they're managing more. And Seneca, who understood the psychology of self-management better than most modern therapists, wrote about this exact internal labor. He said, "He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary." These people learned young not to suffer before necessary, not to borrow pain from possible futures, not to grieve relationships that hadn't ended yet. And so, they process quietly, internally, often long before anyone else knows something is wrong. By the time they go silent, they've already lived through the ending privately. You're just catching up to a conclusion they reached months ago. This is why there's no dramatic exit, no final speech, no explanation sent at 2 a.m. The Stoics believe that the wise person does not argue with what has already been decided by reason. And these people, once reason has decided, do not revisit it. Not because they're cruel, because reopening it would require re-entering a process that is, for them, complete. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." What's striking about people who cut others off is that they have usually realized it, often through loss, through disappointment, through watching cycles repeat until the lesson was unavoidable. They know in their bones that they cannot make someone see them, cannot make someone change, cannot control whether they are valued or understood or treated well. So they stop trying to control it. They control what they can, where they place their energy, who has access to their time, what they're willing to tolerate, and they let everything else go, including people who, despite every opportunity, never learn to deserve them. This is not detachment, this is discernment. The Stoics would recognize it immediately. People who cut everyone off are not broken. They are not incapable of connection or love or loyalty. Many of them are the most intensely loyal people you will ever know, until the moment the evidence becomes undeniable. The exit seems abrupt only because you didn't see the internal work that preceded it. The watching, the waiting, the quiet, hoping that proved itself wrong one too many times. They are not cold, they are clear. And clarity, Awe, when it's hard-won, when it cost you real things to arrive at it, looks from the outside like ice. From the inside, it feels like the first morning in a long time where something isn't pulling at you anymore. The Stoics called that tranquility, ataraxia, freedom from disturbance. It doesn't mean you don't miss people. It means you've accepted that missing them is the price of your own integrity, and you've decided it's worth it. So maybe the question worth sitting with isn't why did they leave without explaining themselves. Maybe it's this: what did they accept about this situation that I'm still refusing to? That answer is yours to find, not theirs to give you. If this landed somewhere real, there's a video next that goes one layer deeper into the specific psychology of people who process everything alone and why their silence is never actually empty. Click and let's keep going.